Hello and welcome back to the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. In 1969, a new progressive rock band stormed onto the scene. King Crimson made several appearances throughout the year and exposed themselves to large, attentive and accepting audiences with big, impactful live shows. Following this success came an album that would pioneer, innovate and lay down the foundations for progressive rock. In the Court of the Crimson King showed to the world exactly what this fresh, new, progressive rock sound was and how you could take all the external elements and amalgamate them into a singular, connected, seamless piece of art. Is In the Court of the Crimson King the definitive prog rock album? Joining me to discuss this is my co-host, Mr. Felipe Amorim. How you doing, man?
Well, good here, man. How are you doing?
Good, very well, thank you. Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
There we go. That sort of set the scene and I'm ready to dive right in. Are you?
I like this new intro. That's great.
I thought, yeah, no, glad to hear it. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Right, well, in keeping with the fashion, if it's not obvious, I'll show you
Yeah.
because I love this album so much. I've got the vinyl.
Oh, you got the actual record.
I do, yeah. So I've got it in my hands. It's very nice. So yeah, if it's not obvious what we're doing this week, we are doing In the Court of the Crimson King by the legendary King Crimson. So a few quick fire facts for you. So it was released the 10th of October 1969, recorded in only 5 weeks between the 7th of July and the 13th of August 1969 in Wessex in London. The genre is obviously progressive rock. It lasts just under 44 minutes. The producers were King Crimson themselves, and the labels associated this were Island, Atlantic, and EG. So that's the basic info. Felipe, do you want to kick us off, man? Anything you want to kick off with?
Well, let's talk about the two guys who I have on my background here. If you're watching this instead of just listening.
They look a little similar to the two guys in my background as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Lars got the album cover with the Schizoid Man. And I've got Robert Fripp and Greg Lake. So some people know Greg Lake from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, of course, and his also prolific solo career. And for me, he's one of, if I had to choose, I don't like doing those top 5 lists or something, but if I have to choose the top 5 or even maybe my top 3 singers of all time, rock singers, I think he would be on the list. He is just such a phenomenal singer and guitar player and bass player. He was one of the greatest. Yeah, so those two guys, they started King Crimson and they knew each other really well. They grew up together, right? You know, I don't know if you know about this. And they went to the same guitar teacher. So basically, the interesting thing about them, they knew everything that the other one knew. Musically.
So, you know that joke when people are like, "Oh, between me and my brother, we know every fact in the world." And you say, okay,
exactly.
Well, what's the answer to this? Oh, my brother knows that one. It's like John and Greg, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So basically,
Robert, sorry, I said John. Robert Fripp.
Yeah. So basically, they've learned the same things, like technically the same things from the same teacher, and they used to go to each other's houses and practice together. So basically, they were, Greg Lake said they were like a mirror, musically speaking. But when you see them on stage performing and when they, writing and composing, they're completely different musicians, which is amazing, isn't it? Like how music is used as a form of expression of your personalities. And even if you learn the same scales, chords, and melodies, two musicians would create completely different pieces of music. But yeah, and they worked really well together for just one album, isn't it? That's what I find amazing about this album.
Well,
it's the
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I watched or I bought a documentary actually just for this episode, which I thought it was going to be a In the Court of the Crimson King making of, but it was just the movie was called In the Court of the Crimson King, but it was just the 50-year journey of King Crimson.
Right.
So unfortunately, it wasn't specific to this album, but it did give me a lot of useful information. And no, it wasn't like the whole journey. It was definitely them. I think it was around 2020 they filmed it, and it was just such an incredible insight to hear Robert Fripp's words about the band, because I'd go as far as to say that he has hated most of the process. And I don't know if you're familiar with this or with his attitude.
No.
Or I wrote it down. The interviewer said to him, how was it being in King Crimson? And he goes, from 1969 to 2013, wretched. and he seemed to hate it. He didn't seem to get on with anyone in the band. So to cut a long story short, even so they went back and they interviewed the old guys as well, like the older members. They interviewed Ian McDonald, Peter Sinfield, Greg Lake wasn't it, but obviously he passed away, didn't he? So they interviewed the older members of the band, and they were all saying that Robert needed control. It felt like Robert needed to be in control. Yeah. And it was more like, there was one guy, I can't remember who he was, but he said, I was really upset because I felt like I was joining Robert in a project. And in fact, he kicked me out. And I was like, well, hold on, this is our project, isn't it? And he was like, nope. So it just seems like, you know, and this is no slight on Robert Fripp because I haven't done anywhere near enough research to get this information, but it seems like Robert was the leader of this band from quite an early stage. Because, yeah, you're right, Greg left after the first album, and a couple of them did. So Giles and McDonald left. So we'll just go through the band members. So you've got Greg Lake on vocals and bass, Robert Fripp on guitars, Michael Giles in drums and percussion, Ian McDonald on sax, flute, clarinet, bass clarinet, mellotron, harpsichord, piano, organ, vibraphone, backing vocals, etc.
A jack of all trades, isn't it?
A jack of all trades, yeah. So half the band left after In the Court of the Crimson King came out, and I think Greg Lake must have left a bit after that anyway.
Yeah, I think he only did this album, and I would argue that what makes this album special is him, you know, because obviously you have this band that lasted for ages, and if I'm not wrong, still active, and but they only had one album with this terrific singer and bassist who is Greg Lake.
Well, everything, man, everything about this lineup. I'm sure we'll get into it, but the whole lineup's just phenomenal. But you're absolutely right. Greg Lake makes it. It's his soft voice, isn't it? That just soft when it needs to be soft, isn't
exactly. It? He's so versatile as a singer. He can be really aggressive and really soft, and he's got such a control of the tone and the notes. It's just perfect.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background. So the way this band came together is there was two groups. There was Giles, and Fripp. That's one group. So I think that was Robert Fripp, Michael Giles, and Michael Giles' brother. I can't remember what his first name is, but they were a band. And then they also had The Creation, which was a band consisting of Ian McDonald and Peter Sinfield. They were the bands before King Crimson, and in a turn of luck, they came together and the right members left their respective bands and became King Crimson. Now, in early '69, they met with the producer, Tony Clark, ready to do the first album, but it really didn't work out, which is how King Crimson ended up producing this album themselves. And I think that's a pretty good event that's happened, because the production of this album is great, and you kind of imagine that everything is the way that someone like Greg Lake or Robert Fripp would have wanted it to be.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's an album led by the musicians, not by a label or producer. So the musical freedom they needed to create their own art was there. So it's like it's no one but the band is deciding the direction of the album. And this, I mean, if you want to play prog music, I imagine it's really hard to produce a prog band, right? With loads of ideas and different time signatures and all that stuff the prog bands do. It's not that easy to keep them under control. And it's actually a good thing that they were not under control, you know.
Yeah, so, kind of let them loose a bit, go free.
Yeah. And interesting thing is that Pete Sinfield, who was the lyricist, he was doing lights. He was the light engineer for the band, right?
Can I interrupt you and do something?
Yeah.
Time for a segment. How rock and roll is that? So here's my question to you. How rock and roll is it having a band member whose job is solely to provide lyrics to the songs and lighting for the stage show?
I mean, it's such a unique thing, but because like is not a guy who, well, most people wouldn't know about him, isn't it? No. It's like I'll give it a solid 65 for that.
Okay, there we go, 65.
Yeah. There's more rock and roll things than that, but that is actually really rock and roll. On that note, I should have done this at the beginning of the show, so I need a drink. So.
The soundtrack to the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast, a can of beer popping open. Enjoy that, sir. Enjoy that. Yeah. So Peter Sinfield, he in this movie I watched, he labeled himself as the jester of the band, which you might initially take as a bit of an insult, because a jester is like, well, the jester performs for the royalty.
Yeah.
But he said someone else, he called himself the jester, and someone else called him the magic fairy of King Crimson. Oh, wow. Which I think, and the vibe I got from this is that Peter really tied things together for the band.
Yeah.
Now, 4 people in the band is not easy, because you can quite easily split into 2 groups of 2. And in the terms of arguments and debates, you can butt heads. When there's 3 or 5, it's easy, because it's 2 versus 1, 3 versus 2. Might not always end amicably. You know, the arguments and discussions to be had might not always be calm, but at least you reach a decided vote where it's like, right, you're outnumbered. But when it's equal, it's a bit harder. And so I think Peter's kind of found himself as I don't want to give the impression that I know this for fact, like he's the deciding vote of King Crimson, but I think he just settled into that role as lyricist, as lighting operator, and just the general guy with the band, who the band could be open with ideas with and share the music.
Yeah, imagine have someone who is kind of a member of the band but is not playing with the band.
Do you know who incredible, isn't it? Oh God, am I the Zeppelin guy?
Peter Grant.
Peter Grant, yeah, of course.
But Peter Grant wasn't involved with the music part of it, isn't it? He's doing the business, but he was so crucial to the band's success. He was like a member of the band.
That's what I mean with Peter here.
Yeah, in this case, it's like he is actively working with the band by providing lyrics, which are obviously really important.
Yeah.
But he is not performing with the band, so it's an interesting role, isn't it? And the lyrics are really abstract. They really like the kind of stuff you expect for a prog band. He was really good at that. The lyrics are not too long. You know, it leaves a lot of room for instrumental parts.
That's what I was going to say. Most songs, you only got like 1 verse and 1 chorus, and then repeated, and then that's normally it for the song, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. How do you want to go about this? There's only 5 songs. Do you want to do each of them?
We can pretty much talk about all of them.
Let's do it.
One thing I find interesting. There's an interesting thing, because it kicks off with almost like a hard rock song, right? I know you got something to say about that one. Just before we actually talk about the song, and then like songs 2 and 3, I Talk to the Wind and Epitaph, they are not really like heavy or intense. So the whole vibe goes down, and it becomes kind of sad, in my opinion. And only by the last song you have that punch in your face again. So it's like the album's got 2 heavy numbers at the beginning and at the end. So that's what you have. It's
almost like the opposite of Animals by Pink Floyd. You know, Animals, you got the short song at the start and the short song at the end, and then 3 big ones in the middle. Exactly. Here, you got the bigger songs at the start and the end, and then the sort of softer ones in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Not only softer, but they're also like less complex if you compare to the first and the last ones, in my opinion, proper prog, and it really hits you and makes you think, wow, this is how can someone possibly play that? Sounds difficult to play, clever, complex, and then it goes more into a mellow kind of vibe throughout most of the album. So
yeah, no, I completely agree. All right, let's kick it off then with track 1, 21st Century Schizoid Man. About 7.5 minutes in length. And actually, from our episode on Emerson, Lake and Palmer on YouTube, someone commented and said that this song, or in their opinion, this song was arguably the first ever prog metal song, which, you know, although metal didn't even start until a year later, you know, we were still seeing the early signs of it coming from bands like Zeppelin and their heavy guitars. This song as well, you know, giving Sabbath the idea of how to really just get over that final line to metal. Yeah. But you can hear it here, man. Intense, heavy riffs, dissonant guitar sounds, the heavy distorted vocals. And even if you take away those, you've got such aggressive saxophone playing, complex drums, thunderous bass lines, and the shouted vocals. It's quite a statement to make on a prog rock album.
Yeah. It is, and it's a really intense start for an album. Because it's not a song. It's not like a happy song. It's not a sad song. for me, I don't know if I can find a word for that.
Do you know the only word I can give you, I think, is aggressive.
Aggressive.
I agree with you. Not happy, not sad. It's just aggressive and in your face, isn't it?
So yeah, so if you consider that there was 1969, that's really heavy for the time, especially the vocals, I would say, because the distorted, there's effects and stuff, but also the way Greg Lake is singing is quite aggressive.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really close to heavy metal for the standards of the time. So I would say that it is a prog metal song. Yeah, I agree with that.
What
the interesting thing, like, just want to point out the fact that this song's got more drum fills than grooves. So basically, Michael Giles, isn't it? He's just like filling every gap with really creative phrases, but it's his phrasing is quite groovy because it's really tight. Because you have a lot of drummers in that time. Guys like Ginger Baker and Keith Moon and Bill Ward, who were the heavy hitting drummers, but they had this kind of sloppy, jazzy feel when they swing all the time.
Okay.
And Giles is steady, is solid. Every note is exactly where it should be, which is a different kind of taste. Let's put it like that. It's not saying that the other guys are some of the greatest as well. I'm just saying I'm particularly a big fan of the kind of shuffle vibe and swing when you're playing fills, but with him it's more like really precise. And Greg Lake actually said that he was a master of coming up with really complicated drum fills, and he did that sometimes for fun to make it impossible for Greg Lake to find where the first beat of the bar is.
Just such a progressive rock musician thing to do, isn't it?
Exactly. Let's make it so hard that not even my bandmates know how to play this.
This is the audition for the band. You got to find the one.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you like about the song?
Well, I like the heaviness of it, and I like the it's, for me, it's like they bring the riff as a theme, so it happens all the time. I like the riff comes in, and then there's vocals, something else, and then the riff again. So I like the way they play with being loud and then slightly more empty and then loud again. They do that quite a lot throughout the album. It's just more evident in this. In the song.
One of my points of this song: big shifts in dynamics and tempos throughout. They're always changing, aren't they? Going really loud, really soft, then really fast, a bit slower. They actually do a thing where they do some hits and then it gets faster, don't they? It's like boom, 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 like, and that sort of stuff you expect to hear perfectly done in electronic music, but they've nailed it here. It's for 1969, man. It's
perfect. There's a bit at the end of the song, well, the second half of the song, where they all playing the same phrase, snare drum
after the solo,
after the solo, and it's like
unbelievable.
It's so unbelievably tight, because nowadays you record something, someone is slightly off, you go on a computer and fix it. But 1969, you've got the band performing live in studio, and you just have to nail it. Also, you're wasting tape if you don't get it right, and that costs a lot of money. So you can see that they played live together and they were well rehearsed. That song, actually, I think they kind of showed their musicianship straight away on the first song.
Well, you've even in the solo, it's very jazzy and jazz fusiony, isn't it? Yeah. So what we call for listeners or viewers who aren't sort of sure, jazz fusion is what you'd call is what, I mean, tell me if you have a different definition, but for me, jazz fusion is jazz music played on rock instruments.
Well, I would basically, I'll say that most people would describe it as jazz plus anything else, right? So,
okay, that's because
you have apart from, let's say, you say like Afro-Cuban jazz is very specific, and but apart from that, what you have is, if the point where you mix funk or rock or anything else, like in terms of instruments or riffs or grooves, you put that into jazz, that's what fusion
that's fair. That's
by
fair.
definition is. But but I agree with you that
you're absolutely right.
If you play a jazzy phrase on a distorted guitar, so that instrument doesn't belong to jazz traditionally. So when you're escaping from that traditional approach, playing something that is jazzy but it's actually rock, so it can only be called fusion, I would say.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But yeah, anyway, really jazzy in the middle, wasn't it? With that, with the solos and the notes they were playing, the scales, the phrases, that was very much jazzy. Really reminded me again, for any listeners, any new listeners and viewers, if you check the show note below, you're going to have a description of the episode as well as a playlist, a companion playlist that we encourage you to listen to before or alongside this episode. And it's got all the songs from the album plus any songs we mention in there. So go down, check it out, and listen along. I'm going to add in a couple of songs by Frank Zappa, one called Cosmic Debris, which really reminds me of the saxophone and the hard rock vibe of this song, reminds me of the 21st Century one, and Gumbo Variations from Frank Zappa's Hot Rats album, which is actually the same year as this one. Just the way that the violin and the saxophone solos, they're not controlled. It's not like, right, I've got to play this scale perfectly. Go and listen to Gumbo Variations, and it's 16 minutes of a violin jam and a saxophone jam, where the saxophone is playing some of the horriblest noises you'd ever hear. But because of the vibe of the jam, it's just like you get the feeling of, you're like, no, carry on, mate. Don't stop, because this sounds awesome. So go and check them out for yourselves. They'll be in the playlist. Anything else about 21st Century Schizoid Man?
Not now.
No. Oh, okay, great. All right. Well, let's move on to track 2. I Talk to the Wind. Beautiful, intricate acoustic guitar with Greg Lake's super soft vocals, harmonized, if you like, not literally, but I mean for me, in harmony with melodic flute, and a beautiful mellotron that adds this kind of dreamlike feeling to the track. I mean, this is my favorite on the album. What about you?
Yeah, well, it's not my favorite, but it is. It sounds like the slowest and the quietest song in the album, isn't it? And it's and I think it is a really, really good contrast coming from Schizoid Man. And yeah, it's a beautiful piece of music, and I think the vocals are just brilliant. Yeah, yeah, and again, it's got that like 1969 vibe, isn't it? You got to listen to this. Imagine that you were in England in 1969, so that
in the 60s,
that would bring the right feel to it, I guess. So yeah, it's just a really, really beautiful piece of music.
I think what it does so well is it kind of avoids that standard structure that you're used to with songs, with verse, chorus, solo, chorus, bridge, outro. You know, it just kind of feels like it flows freely throughout, and it's like you're almost not sure where it's going to take you, even though the different sections aren't dramatic, you're still there when it changes, and you're like, oh, that's different, oh, that's odd.
It's more subtle than in the first song, isn't it? It changes, it flows into the next
perfectly
part. It's like,
and the flute solo at the end is just unbelievable. And again, this is what is progressive. We're seeing unusual instruments like a classical flute coming in and playing on rock music, and it really reminded me of A Pillow of Winds by Pink Floyd.
Oh yeah,
you know, from the Metal album. Really had that. Both songs have the word wind in, so that's a little thing.
The interesting thing about Ian MacDonald is he didn't have any kind of rock music background at all.
Oh really? No, at all.
He was like a kind of a military brass section.
That explains it. Explains it.
And so Greg Lake said that this is one of the best things about him. He came with a completely different approach. Like you can tell. So it really adds some textures to their music that you wouldn't have otherwise.
It's just such a different feeling compared to track 1, isn't it? It's almost like chalk and cheese, night and day. It's you'd question if it was the same album. So hold on, the Spotify just screwed me over. Have they sent me to a different album? Nope, the second song of the same album. But yeah, do you want to kick us off on Epitaph?
Yes, that's my favorite.
Ah, interesting. Okay,
I love it. Yeah, I love all of it, and I think I'll tell you why. Because I kind of at a certain point in my life I had enough of prog rock, because I listened to a lot of it when it was
that's fair enough,
16, 17, and then I started playing music, playing bands, and because I didn't start playing the 60s, so there's no place where you can play prog rock and make any money. So so I never played that kind of stuff with bands, and so I got into more like simple forms of music, and I I've learned to enjoy it. So sometimes when I listen to something that's longer than 10 minutes now, I think, wow. When I was a teenager, I wouldn't listen to anything that wasn't at least 15 minutes long. So that's not a good song. It's only 5 minutes. That's rubbish. But now, yeah,
how are you meant to fit in all the solos?
I would judge a song by the length. I would look at the back of the CDs and say, oh my God, 4-minute songs. I'm not going to listen to this. Anyway, but then having so listening to this album again, I'm like, wow, there's some really intelligent life forms in prog rock, isn't it? So basically, because we think of prog as self-indulgent all the time, which it is most of the time, and this album didn't feel like that to me. And this song,
that's a very good point. Yeah, it's a very good point.
Specifically, Epitaph is a song that is like, it kind of makes you feel sad, and it's again a ballad. It's much slower than under the first and the last song of the album. The lyrics are beautiful, and it's got a sort of a groove to it. So you have the drummer I just mentioned, who's technically amazing, but it's keeping it really simple because that's what the song needs. So you don't need to show off all the time.
This is great points you're making, bro. Because I mean, a lot of what you're saying, you might hear it again in my monologue at the end. But I'm agreeing with you on everything. Epitaph is like, for me, the first half of it is like a soft rock song, and I mean super soft. But then as you go through it and as it develops, it gets so much more technical, and the production is so intricate that to hear all the layers of everything that goes on is amazing. The second half of it is so much more progressive and experimental in terms of your sound, the structure, the orchestration. But I mean, for me, the interplay between Fripp's guitar and McDonald's mellotron, it's almost like it's the future and the past. You've got the past with the acoustic guitar, like that's where music has come from. If you've got the future in the mellotron, that's where music is going, the more soft sounding electronic sound. But yeah, what else have I got here? Lush orchestration, haunting melodies, and big dynamic shifts again. But a very, very lovely and complex song, because the arrangement literally is just showing off how good these guys are and how good their compositional skills are, but they're not showing off. As you said, it is all for the song.
And maybe unlike most prog rock songs, this one started from the lyrics. It started as a poem. You can tell, isn't it? It's a very poetic lyric. And
short song as well.
Yeah, Pete Singfield said that he came up with the poem, but then this one is more of a collaboration. The other guy started adding parts, and he said the most Greg-ish part of the song was, "But I fear tomorrow I'll be crying." So that line, which is a beautiful line and sits so well with the song, that wasn't written by Pete Singfield, that was written by Greg Lake. He put that one line there, and it almost makes you cry when he sings it. It's just beautiful.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's the last lyric of the song, isn't it? They repeat it throughout the outro, and it's lovely. Okay, moving on to Moonchild, the fourth song. Now, I thought this was quite similar to Epitaph. But far more ambient and atmospheric. I feel like a lot more emphasis was placed on technology and soundscapes and avant-garde atmosphere noises. Do you know what I mean? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, it's the second half of it is it's experimental, really. There's not a like a single second of a composition on the second half of the song. It's just all of it improvised. Sounds a lot like free jazz to me at some point. And it's just like, it sounds like they're just hitting things and making some noise.
Well, do you know what? Can I just respond to that and say that I agreed with you on my first listen of it, and maybe even my second listen of it. But as I listened to it again and again, you're right, there is a lot of just noise put in, percussion hit, and then it doesn't come again. And one thing that stands out to me is the guitar. In that second section, that sort of, I don't know if you call it a guitar solo, but the ambient section where all that noise starts from, the guitar phrases are quite jazzy. Even if he just plays one chord, it's jazzy.
Yeah.
And I'm here thinking, well, I'm familiar with random noises in songs, okay? For listeners and viewers, I listen to a lot of Frank Zappa. So there will be a song that has the most beautiful, soulful groove going on, and then suddenly there'll be a burp. So that is just Frank Zappa. And he was influenced by the composer Edgar Varese, who was, again, very, I can't remember what they call that style of classical music. Modern or whatever, modern classical. But anyway, it's very avant-garde, it's very out there, it's unorthodox, it's unusual. So I'm used to hearing noises throughout. And there wasn't a pattern with this one. You're right. There were just random noises, but I still felt like we were getting a bit of communication between the instruments. The guitar does something, and then suddenly the percussion just answers back with it. And it didn't bother me as much
jamming.
as
They
I
are
did in the
interacting.
first time.
Yeah, they are interacting.
Yeah.
It's not like when I say random, it is at some point, feels like, well, they're just hitting things and whatever. But yeah,
But there
someone
does
does
seem to
something,
be,
someone reacts. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
there
like
does.
it's like you try to create a language, and it's a little bit similar to writing music with your bandmates instead of just like writing a song on your own and then bringing it to the band. So they're kind of creating on the spot, which again is something that I really miss in modern music, like people just jamming along and coming up with stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, beautiful or precise or correct, but it's rock and roll, right? So
Yeah.
it's free.
I just feel like, you know, like I've said, I've listened to a lot of Zappa and a lot of avant-garde stuff where there are just random hits in. I feel like there was more method to this madness than some of the stuff I've spoken about before. Like other examples, it felt like instead of we're going 100% avant-garde with random hits, squeaks here and there, it felt like, okay, let's do 80% avant-garde, but we're going to keep some musicality and we're going to keep the guitar playing jazzy phrases. We want to keep this doing a little rhythm here. It just felt like it was thought about rather than random.
Yeah. I think that they probably rehearsed some form of it before they went to the studio and record, but then or they agreed to, well, when we got to this point, we're going to start jamming or creating on the spot. But what I've to make it clear, the two parts of the song are called the dream and the illusion. So you have two parts with two different names. And it's interesting because, like the previous song, Epitaph has got two parts as well called, the title of the song says, including March for No Reason and Tomorrow. But you can't really notice any change that makes you think, oh, this is another part of the song.
In Epitaph.
Yeah, in Epitaph.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so someone, I found some information about this. They apparently, it was a suggestion by the band's management that you could make more royalties by having more songs inside a song, which I'm not quite sure. Doesn't sound accurate to me, but it could have been just a joke. But you can't really tell the different parts was. So maybe that's what is brilliant about this song, because you're coming from two slow songs and you need to somehow build up for an explosive ending. Right. And so the previous two songs, they the changes in the songs, they just flow. You go from one part into another. It's very subtle. With this one, it's more like we finish this how can I put it, well-written piece of music with all the parts really well explained, and then out of the blue, the second half is completely different and random. So I think it's a great way of connecting let's put it, the quiet part of the album to the end.
That's a great point, and I didn't even think about it, because there is a hecticness about the second half of Moonchild, although it might be organized, as we've alluded to. We're not sure. It does, I hear. That's a very good point, man. Very good point. And so then that takes us into the final song of the album, which by the way, I lied. I Talk to the Wind is my second favorite song on the album, because The Court of the Crimson King is my favorite song. It might actually be my favorite prog rock song of all time. I first heard it when I first watched the movie Children of Men, and it plays at the start of that. And I think maybe I was with my brother, and he told me about the song, or I Shazammed it or something. I just listened to it, and when that chorus comes in, just so soft and haunting, da 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 da, in the court of the Crims, and then the snare, and then it just hits you like a fucking brick wall, doesn't it?
It is. It really hits you.
So
there's the kind of choir style vocals as well, the harmonies, and it's epic.
Here's what I've got:
right?
majestic, anthemic.
Anthemic.
Yeah.
It's very Spinal Tap.
Yeah. What a song, though. I mean, you got everything in here. You got the rock, you got some folk, you got the classical elements as well. I thought the middle section was so beautifully classical, where you had that flute just sort of tying it over till the next section. But the rest of the instruments worked around the flute. This is so obviously a rock song, yet in that middle section you've got the flute leading the way, with the rock instruments just dropping back and keeping the rhythm and everything. Just amazing. For me, it takes the best elements of the whole album: the classical, the ambience, the soft vocals, and the heavy rock, but fashions it into like an amazing end to a progressive rock album. What do you think about this song?
I think I really love the contrast between the intense instrumental parts and the fairly quiet sections that give space to the vocals. As we said, this happens all along the album, but it's really like specifically beautiful in this song. And the coda, the flute at the very end, I didn't see that coming. It was like, oh, wow. So like, when you think they put everything into a song, that specific bit at the end is, so it's I find it I would say it's an unpredictable piece of music for me. You don't know what's going to happen.
True.
But it doesn't sound like a bunch of bits and pieces put together. It does sound like an intelligent composition. And it sounds like they know exactly what they're doing there. And I love that. I love the fact that they've planned this one really well.
There's little tweaks in there, like the outro right. So you got the chorus, which everyone knows, but then at the outro, they take the exact same rhythm. They copy and paste the chorus from earlier in the song to the end, but they remove the vocals. But there's just something different about it. It's almost got like a bit of positivity, a bit of hope, a bit of charm. Felipe, I haven't even analysed what they've done. I don't know if they've changed the chord, if they've changed one note, but something is different from the choruses at the start of the song to the choruses at the end of the song. Apart from there's no vocals, there's just something so hopeful about it. And I think the whole album, through the lyrics, through the sound of the songs, through the mood of the songs, take you through quite a sad journey, like you said. And I just feel like all the sadness is kind of almost paid off at the end, just with the positivity and the hopefulness that I hear in the outro of The Court of the Crimson King. And for me, it just makes the album even better than I thought it was at the start.
Yeah.
Tiny details like this that progressive bands think about.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes just as you kind of thinking this is getting too slow and mellow.
Right. I agree.
Yeah,
completely.
and just it's a punch in the face again. Just like the beginning. So I find quite hard to find the perfect song to end an album. And I think most albums we've covered, they have great like opening tracks.
Yeah.
And I think people think a lot about the opening track.
You have to. It's the first impression you get.
People are going to put up, especially at the time, you're going to put your record, and as soon as it starts playing, you want to cause a good impression from the beginning, so people don't just give up and then they don't listen to the rest of it. Now it's fairly easy to just say, well, the last song can be whatever. It doesn't have doesn't have to cause a huge impact on anyone, because they've if you have this like kind of mind-blowing start for an album, that, to be fair, if the album only had one good song, any of those, and if it was all crap, just one good song would be enough to make it a
decent enough album.
Yeah. But then every single song has its role in the album. And the last one, it's as good as the first one, which I find normally really hard to find.
I've got a question written here.
Yeah.
Is this one of the best closing tracks of all time? So you've answered that.
Yeah,
you know, it's
sure.
as good as
for sure. Yeah, no
that's
doubt
awesome.
about it.
That's awesome. Then we've done the 5 tracks, and obviously they're long in length. You know, we know they're progressive. They're quite a lot of changes within the songs, but
the album itself's not long.
No, it's not 40, just under 44 minutes. So I really want to talk about now is I alluded to it at the intro, at the introduction of the episode, but what I think we need to talk about is how important this album is to progressive rock. Because from all, I mean, we weren't there in 1969, but from everything we've read and all the research we've done, this seems like the beginning for progressive rock. Here's some quotes. So from Paul Stump.
And it never got much better than that.
Brian, it's really interesting you say that, because I've got something to say about that in my monologue, but I'd like to ask you as well. Quote from Paul Stump, who wrote The History of Progressive Rock. If progressive rock as a discrete genre can be said to have had a starting point, then this is probably it. Classic rock said, it blew off the doors of musical convention and cemented these quintessentially British innovators' place in rock history for all of time. All Music said, as if somehow prophetic, King Crimson projected a darker and edgier brand of post-psychedelic rock. And I just want to talk about how important this album is, because as we said, this is essentially the starting place, the foundation, day zero of prog rock. And the way they did it is very simple. They took their rock music and they added the unusual elements: jazz, avant-garde, classical sections, classical melodies, symphonic instrumentation, electronic ambience, longer songs, unconventional time signatures, unconventional song structures.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. But Felipe, they didn't do 3 of those things and mix it with rock. They did everything.
Yeah,
exactly. They just took it all.
Yeah. So if you listen to that first track, that is maybe it's the best song to be used as an example of what prog rock is. If someone asks you, like, what's prog rock? So listen to 21st Century Schizoid Man.
Very good point. Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
It's got everything in it, and it's still and it's almost as heavy as a hard rock or heavy metal song.
It really pushed the boundaries of contemporary music. You know, we've got to think, because you've got to think 2 years before Beatles did Sgt. Pepper. It's almost, Felipe, man, it's so weird thinking about this. It's almost different worlds, isn't it?
Yeah.
But 2 years difference.
Yeah.
I still,
So music has evolved so much at the time. In the short, from 65 to 70, it's
unrecognizable.
Yeah, it is, and it's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, we don't get much of this nowadays.
No, but when you think what the Beatles were doing in '67 with Sgt. Pepper, people were like, "My God, this is different." Yeah, 2 years later, you get this.
Yeah,
really pushing other. I mean, here's what I wrote in my notes.
This album is shocking.
Yes, no, definitely. MacDonald spent many hours overdubbing layers of mellotron and his woodwind instruments to achieve the thick, lush, orchestrated sound they got. Now, this was not easy in 1969 because I think they were using an 8-track tape, I think I read. But still, 4 of those tracks as the guitar, bass, drums, and vocals. So he only had 4 other tracks to do his classical stuff on. So what he did was he'd record his classical section on an 8-track, what do you want to call it, condense it and export it if you like. Then he'd use that as one of the 8 tracks on the final thing.
Yeah, so you know what I mean? 4 tracks into 1 track, and then so that's what people were doing at the time.
Yeah, so he took 8 tracks into 1 track, put it in as one of the main 8 tracks, which, you know, as you said, it was conventional, it was normal for the time, but I read that
it was, but it's like
to nail
there's a limitation that you need to work around it,
and to nail it would be really hard, wouldn't it? To have absolutely smashed that. But culturally, I mean, this literally shaped the direction of progressive rock music. Everything that came after that it's a new type. It's a new. What am I trying to say? It's a flag in music history. This album. Do you think that's fair to say?
It is fair to say, and I'm really happy that you chose this album for
Me
us
too.
because I had to listen to it again. It's yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I have a short, tragic story about the album
Oh,
to
okay.
share. So the album cover, I think it's a big part of what this album is because again, I find that face kind of, I don't know if it's shouting or laughing or
That's a
whatever,
good point. Yeah, I'm just looking at
but
mine.
it is quite disturbing. And Robert Fripp actually said that that's the face of the schizoid man. So it
Yes.
says that he calls it a like smiling face. I don't think it's a smiling, but he says if you ignore the mouth and look into the eyes, you see a great amount of sadness. And that
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt
describes the
you.
album. Yeah.
I think, right, I read the same thing you've read. I think he's talking about the other guy, this guy.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah, so here's
Yeah,
what I
you're
took.
right.
So he said,
No, you're
right,
right, because that one is smiling.
but
So
here's what he said. He said
that's not the cover. That's the
he
other. Yeah,
said the outer
the back.
vinyl. So the outer is
Yeah.
21st Century Schizoid Man.
Yes.
When you open the vinyl, it's this guy.
Right,
And
and
he
you
said
can see.
the inner guy
Makes sense.
is King Crimson.
And he's smiling, but he's sad.
Yeah, because if you
Yes,
cover
makes
the
a lot of
mouth,
sense.
let me try. There you go. If you cover the mouth, his eyes are sad.
Yeah, such a sad
So yeah,
face.
sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
I
no,
thought I
that's
said so.
interesting.
Yeah, so that's the
So
Schizoid Man, and that's the Schizoid Man. That's King Crimson.
oh, interesting. And so the face of the schizoid man was based. So the artist, he was only 21 years old. Barry Godber. So he was looking at his own face in the mirror to take an idea and shape that face for the schizoid man. But the thing is, he was friends with Pete Singfield, and they didn't realize until halfway through the album recording they needed a cover. They were like, "Oh my God, we're going to finish this album in a few days, and we haven't got a cover." And then Pete Singfield said, "I know a guy who's graphic designer. He can do something for us. Young man, he is really creative. So okay, ask him to design a few options for the album cover and bring it to us." So he came with this package and with and scissors and he cut it open, and that face just dropped and fell on the floor, and they saw that face and they said, "That's the schizoid man." With one interesting thing, the song had just been recorded on that day. So the artist was commissioned to do a cover for the album, but he didn't know the song that that they thought was that face. You know what I mean? So basically, it's like he was drawing the schizoid man without knowing the song existed. The band they didn't have the chance to listen to the final song yet when he walked into the studio, and he cut the packet open, and that thing dropped on the floor, and they look at that face. That's it. That's the album cover. They knew it right then because that's the schizoid man. And the tragedy is only 3 days after that, this young man, 21 years old, he's walking down the street and he has a heart attack and dies. So
Sorry, do you mean the man whose face that is, or the artist?
Well, the artist, Barry Godber, that's his own face. I mean, it's not
yes,
his own face, but he looked at his own face as a model to start drawing it. So probably it's very different.
3 days after.
He died three days after, after they received the final artwork from him.
Oh my God!
And that was it. And so that's his legacy, And
but what a legacy to have, because it is one of the most iconic album covers in rock music, isn't it?
It is.
Dare I say all of music?
Yeah, it's one of the most iconic album covers of all time, and it's so disturbing. I can't stare at it for too long.
No,
it's such a beautiful piece of art. And Robert Fripp has the original painting.
Yes, he did, because he was upset. He was worried that it was sitting in the executive offices of the label, and he was worried that the way, he said, when he went in for a meeting, he said the way the sun was hitting it, he's like, it's gonna wear out. It's not gonna be good. So he was like, "Can I take it back?" But yeah, that album cover is just fantastic.
It is amazing. Yeah.
Any other points? Any other things you want to touch on?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's all I
We've
wanted
done it
to
pretty,
say.
yeah, we've done quite a lot. So in terms of sort of like awards and stuff, Rolling Stone named this album the second greatest prog album of all time after Dark Side of the Moon. Which, do you know what? I feel like that's kind of appropriate. Because the best prog rock album of all time, I think most people would naturally float to Dark Side of the Moon. And I think when
I
you
would say
look
it's the
at,
most popular, but I wouldn't say it's the best, right?
fair enough, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Yeah, if I had to think about it, it
It's
might
my
not be my
favorite.
answer, but
Yeah.
I know what you mean. Yeah, but in the 5 year gap of Dark Side of the Moon coming out and Court of the Crimson King, you know, that in that gap, it's brilliant to see how much it changed. But almost in terms of Dark Side of the Moon, how much more simplistic it went. When you listen to what happened in the early 70s from Yes, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, stuff got pretty, as we like to say, wanky in certain places. But to hear Pink Floyd keep that essence, I'm almost looking at Dark Side of the Moon in a different light now.
Yeah.
Because I've heard how good the supposed first ever prog rock album was. I'm hearing more of a link between Dark Side of the Moon to this than one of those crazy Emerson Lake and Palmer albums. And I'm not comparing, it's not one's better than the other. I'm appreciating it more. But in the 1000 albums you have to hear before you die, Colin Larkin rated this number 193. So they're the accolades. It didn't really, you know, critically, it did kind of well. There was a few people who didn't enjoy it. I haven't even looked into like album sales and stuff because I couldn't really find it in the immediate research I did. Um, which tells me, just like I'd expected, it's not an overly popular album to the mainstream, but rock fans and prog rock fans know this is the one, don't they?
Yeah. Do you think? I think I know the answer. Do you think if someone who's not into all sorts of rock, but let's say someone who's a heavy metal fan, would you still recommend this album?
Yes.
Yeah.
To put it short, because how can you not listen if you're a heavy metal fan? Let's just take that example. How can you not listen to 21st Century Schizoid Man and be like, oh my god, I can hear the music I love, the heavy metal I love, I can hear it in this.
Yeah.
And this was 1 year supposedly before metal even began. So yeah, I'd show this to anyone because I'd love to show this off. Songs like I Talk to the Wind, I always think about my family because my family have such a diverse taste in music. You know, my sister, she loves musical theatre. My auntie, she kind of love, and my auntie and uncle, they kind of love pop, but not always so poppy, you know, not like the radio pop, but popular music, especially popular rock bands. My dad likes the sort of old school rock bands, and I like imagining how they'd all react to an album. And I want to play I Talk to the Wind to the likes of my auntie and my sister because I want to know how much they'd enjoy it.
All like it, yeah.
Because although it's 6 minutes, okay, but it's all calm, it's all intimate, it's all intricate, it's soft. There's nothing not to like. So yes, long answer to your short question. I would show this to anyone. And I wouldn't with other albums we've done in the past.
Yeah.
This
Some
one,
of the prog albums are only for prog
yeah,
fans, but
exactly.
this definitely not.
Oh, cool. There we go.
How about your monologue?
Well, let me do the monologue and then I'll ask you a
Yeah.
question because I did have one more point to discuss. Right. In the Court of the Crimson King is a seamless amalgamation of everything we know and love about progressive rock rolled into one definitive piece of art. The album laid the foundations for prog to come and did so in such a cohesive way in which everything feels so natural and so right, but not overstating or overdoing the progressive points. You have the jazz elements in 21st century, lush classical orchestrations littered throughout, but most prevalent in I Talk to the Wind and Epitaph. Beautifully atmospheric ambience in Epitaph and Moonchild, and unusual avant-garde passages in Moonchild, but all tied together with majestic, anthemic, impactful rock music, which is even more evident at the end of the album. The musicianship throughout this is impeccable, with Fripp's varying guitar tones and styles, Lake's emotive vocals and driving bass line, MacDonald's stunning orchestration, composition and arrangements, and Giles' thumping, fill-littered drums, all joined together with Sinfield's thought-provoking, short but sweet lyrics. Musicianship, however, comes second to the songwriting and composition for this album, and this is where I feel prog should aim to reach. Admittedly, I'm far from well versed in prog, but from what I've heard and what my main problem with prog is that I hear a clear distinction between albums that write music for the sake of the complexity, intricacy, and difficulty, and those who write it for the music. I understand that there are audiences for both, but for me, real progressive music is not needing to show off for it to be good, and King Crimson established that with this album. I haven't even mentioned the fact that it is a debut album. No several attempts to get it right or several years needed to gel as a band. The talent these guys possess and their seeming professionalism to just form a band, get a fan base, and write/produce one of rock's best ever albums is a marvel to me, and something that I don't feel gets spoken about enough. Massive credit to King Crimson for pulling this out of the bag so early in their career. It's almost impossible for me to think of another debut album that is a perfect sonic example of the music that it would go on to pioneer and innovate. I'd go as far as to say that this is the best prog rock album I've ever heard, and the fact that, for me, I haven't heard any prog album that is better than this is a testament to how pioneering, innovative, and incredible this album is, and how immaculately King Crimson executed their debut release. Dare I say it, 10 out of 10, perfect, a landmark and genre-defining album.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Thank you.
I couldn't have said it better. But
thank you. Bit of a long one, but I thought I needed to get all the points in. So my question, and you alluded to it earlier, and this is why I had a smile on my face. It's almost a bit insulting what I'm going to say, but you said it, so I'm in the clear.
Yeah, blame it on me.
Yeah. I'm trying to phrase it in a polite way, because is this the best prog rock ever was? And did anyone, in your opinion, do you think anyone improved on it? Because I don't.
I think you could claim that some albums can be as good as this one in many ways. Never better. I wouldn't say there's a prog rock album that is like clearly better than this one.
And you like prog rock quite a bit.
I do, yeah.
You listen
to quite a lot of it, and some obscure.
Well, here's a question for the audience, for the listeners. Sorry.
Yeah, I think this it's got a perfect balance between melodies, lyrics, instrumentation,
heaviness as well.
Heaviness, and the fact it was done right at the beginning.
That's another.
If you consider that no one has done anything like that up to this point in time, so that makes it even more impressive.
But bro, like I said in the monologue, it's their debut album as well. Yeah. Like, it's not like they needed a few albums.
Right? Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Question to the audience, the listeners and the viewers. Let us know, please, if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are, and I know we've got a lot of really hardcore progressive rock fans, because they're commenting on all the Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes videos. We know you're there. Let us know what you think about this particular discussion point. Is this the birth of progressive rock as we know it? Question one. Is there an album that has matched this or got better than it? Question two. And question three, is it the best prog ever was?
Yeah, did prog get any better after the first, if this is the first,
because
did it get any better after the first prog album? Also, can you hear the influences in other bands? Which albums sound like this one, or even remotely like it? Can you notice which bands were influenced by this album, not by the band itself, but by the album?
There you go. There's your fourth question. So yeah, please let us know in the comments. All good? All done?
Yes, all good.
Fantastic. All right, let's wrap up then. Guys, thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. As we say every week, please help us out. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit like and subscribe so you stay up to date with all of our content. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please just scroll down, give us a rating, give us a review, and it sends us up the charts to be seen by more appropriate people. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for being with us for another episode. Keep on rocking, everyone, and don't do anything else.
And as usual, guys, you take care and long live